Lately, Anastasia Bennett had been living in the grip of anxiety and fatigue. Her father, Valentine Bennett, once a formidable general, now retired, felt the strain of time more and more keenly every day. His heart often failed, reminding him with painful attacks, and old wounds from his years of service made it hard to forget the past. The doctors insisted that he should spend more time outdoors, breathing fresh air. And Valentine himself had long dreamed of it. However, Anastasia could not tolerate the idea. She was worried about her father and was sure that the country life would not be good for him. Her determination only grew stronger, and she was going to speak to the attending physician to support her fears. But Mr. Bennett insisted that they were only dreams, nothing more, and were not worth discussing further. The doctor, who had been monitoring Valentine's health for years, agreed that fresh air could be beneficial, but cautioned that life in the countryside required physical work, and that would be disastrous for a man with such health problems. Anastasia, busy at work and unable to visit her father often, could not bear the thought that he would be lonely and might worsen his condition by trying to cope with the hardships of village life. She felt the need to protect him from unnecessary worry and strain. A few days after this conversation, coming home after a long day at work, Anastasia heard the phone ring. It was her father's doctor, whose voice was agitated. He reported that Valentine had suddenly disappeared from the hospital. Hearing this, Anastasia froze as if her heart had malfunctioned as well. How could this have happened? Her father had always been a man of strict rules and would never leave the hospital without an explanation. The doctor tried to make sense of what had happened and asked Anastasia to remember the last time she had seen her father. It turned out that Mr. Bennett had told the nurse when he left that he had to go to town on business and would be back soon. However, he had done so without permission, which greatly disturbed the doctor. Anastasia could not hide her excitement. She was afraid that something terrible had happened to her father, that his heart might have failed and he might have collapsed somewhere in the city, without help or support. The doctor tried to reassure her, saying that he had already called all the hospitals and morgues, but no one matching Valentine's description had been reported. Even the police had confirmed that there had been no elderly accidents during the day. But Anastasia couldn't shake the oppressive feeling that something was wrong with her father. She tried to call his cell phone, but the phone was disconnected. Soon she arrived at her father's apartment and went through all the rooms, but her heart clenched again with anxiety. Valentine was nowhere to be found. The next morning, not yet fully recovered from her troubling thoughts, Anastasia went to the hospital. Her heart was clenching with worry, and the only thing she could do now was to talk to the doctor and try to find out more about her father's strange disappearance. She was approaching the hospital when she just saw the doctor, who was returning home after a night's duty. They met eyes, and the doctor's eyes reflected fatigue mixed with sympathy. The doctor had learned from Anastasia that no trace of her father's apartment had been found, and the nurse with whom Mr. Bennett had spoken before he left was unfortunately unable to add anything new. The only thing the doctor could suggest was to speak to the neighbors in the ward. However, as it turned out, they only became concerned after Mr. Bennett didn't show up for lunch, making the search very difficult. If he doesn't show up by morning, the doctor advised, you should file a police report. In his current state of health, every hour is worth its weight in gold. The doctor tried to reassure Anastasia, noting that her father's physical condition was stable, although he really should have been under the care of specialists. However, his voice betrayed more than just concern for the patient's health. The doctor mentioned a recent altercation between Mr. Bennett and his son Marcus that had occurred during Marcus's last visit to the hospital. This incident had kept the doctor on his toes, especially after he noticed that Valentine's condition had worsened since the quarrel. It turned out that there had not been a warm relationship between father and son for a long time. They did not even congratulate each other on their birthdays. The doctor said that the quarrel had to do with money, but Mr. Bennett himself did not want to go into details, leaving the doctor in the dark. These words puzzled Anastasia. Why would Marcus, who, as far as she knew, had never asked his father for money, provoke such a quarrel? Questions swarmed in her mind, but there were no answers, and the situation became more and more confusing. Leaving the hospital, Anastasia immediately contacted Marcus and insisted on a meeting. Her brother was irritated by her insistence and wondered why he had been pulled out of work. His frustration was obvious, and he wasn't ready to discuss the details, despite the importance of the situation. When they did meet, Marcus did reveal that during a visit to the hospital, his father had asked him for a large sum of money, $900,000. Marcus, who was in debt and paying off a car loan, could not afford such an amount. He mentioned that his father had said that the amount was a matter of life and death, but did not explain why he needed the money. Anastasia was stunned. She couldn't understand why her father had turned to Marcus, especially knowing his financial difficulties. In the absence of answers and details, the night passed in anxiety for her, and in the morning Mr. Bennet still hadn't shown up. Leaving a warning at work about his delay, Anastasia headed for the police station. On the way, she ran into her friend Alicia Miller. Seeing Anastasia in such a state, Alicia offered to discuss the situation. Anastasia told her about her father's disappearance and her recent fight with Marcus. Alicia was surprised to hear that Marcus had asked Mr. Bennet for money, knowing his own financial problems, including late paychecks and a car loan. The conversation with Alicia left even more questions, but Anastasia was determined to find her father and learn the truth. Alicia, always ready to make unexpected assumptions, thought aloud that the situation could have been quite different. Perhaps it was Marcus who had asked her father for money, and when Mr. Bennet had refused, conflict had broken out between them. The thought slipped into her words so cautiously, yet insistently, as if Alicia really believed that such a turn of events was possible. She even speculated that Marcus might have been more interested in the money than met the eye. He might even have faked her father's disappearance to get his property and savings. In the event of Mr. Bennet's death, Marcus could only count on half of the inheritance, since Anastasia had rights to it as well. But Anastasia, despite all the anxious thoughts running through her head, couldn't believe her brother would do such a thing. Marcus had always been someone she could understand and justify, even if he sometimes acted rashly. So why was Alicia so vigorously defending him? That question, like a bitter residue, remained somewhere in the back of her mind. At the police, Anastasia discreetly filed a report on her father's disappearance. The investigator, a man with a tired but attentive look, listened to her carefully and asked a few clarifying questions. It was clear from what he said that Mr. Bennet had been missing for about 27 hours, and the last they knew of him was a conversation with a nurse when he had said he would be back soon, but he had never returned. The investigator began questioning Anastasia about her father's life and surroundings. It turned out that Mr. Bennet lived alone, and his contacts with the world were limited. Most of his military friends had either passed away or had traveled to other cities. When the investigator asked if Mr. Bennet could have gone to another city to visit someone, Anastasia shook her head in the negative. Her father would never leave without telling her, and his health would hardly allow such long journeys. The investigator asked for the contacts and addresses of Mr. Bennet's acquaintances in case any of them might be useful. Anastasia then recounted the argument between her father and Marcus, mentioning that, according to the doctor, it was her father who had asked for the money. However, she admitted that she could not say this with certainty, as she had not heard the whole conversation. After the conversation, Anastasia felt awkward and a little treacherous talking about family problems to outsiders, but she realized that she was obliged to tell everything she knew. If Marcus was innocent, he wouldn't be accused without reason. When Anastasia left the police station, her thoughts were preoccupied with what was happening, but her work at the beauty parlor demanded attention. On her way to work, her phone vibrated unexpectedly. A message from an unfamiliar number. Something inside her instantly snapped when she saw the short text. "I'm fine, Father." Anastasia's fingers trembled as she tried to call back, but the phone was off. Anxiety came over her head again, and she decided to return to the police immediately to inform the investigator of the new message. When she was back at the police station, she became anxious. She told the investigator about the strange message and expressed concern that it might not be from her father, as the phone remained unavailable. The investigator, with professional calmness, noted that it was too early to draw conclusions. He suggested first checking who the phone number from which the message had come was registered to. Anastasia, worried and anxious, asked him to speed up the process, hoping that it would help her find her father. The investigator assured her that they would try to find out who the number belonged to and how her father could have gotten it. Although alarming, the appearance of the message was at least a lead they could build on in their investigation. Anastasia went back to work, thanking the investigator for her help and promising to report any new developments immediately. But when her phone rang again during her lunch break, she felt her insides clench. The investigator told her that the number from which the message had come belonged to Marcus, her brother. Shocked by this discovery, Anastasia did not hesitate to leave work and hurried to the police station. When she entered, she was met by Marcus. He looked tired and tense. "I told the investigator everything," he said quietly, avoiding her gaze. "I signed a release. If I'd known anything else that might have helped, I would have testified by now." But there was something uncertain in his voice, as if he was still hiding something. Marcus nervously explained that the phone that had sent that strange message had indeed been bought for their father. However, he had never gotten around to transmitting it directly. Their father had supposedly asked him to purchase the phone himself while he was in the hospital. Anastasia listened to her brother, but she couldn't understand why he didn't give the phone in person if her father was waiting for it. Her brother's logic seemed strange and unconvincing. Before she could leave the station, Anastasia found herself in the investigator's office again. He confirmed that Marcus had indeed bought the phone from which the message had been sent. But what did that mean? Was the phone bought for his father or for some other purpose? The investigator added that he had already had a chance to speak with Marcus' wife, Kathleen. She said that on the day her father disappeared, Marcus had left home and returned late at night, without explaining where he had been. However, Anastasia knew that the relationship between her brother and his wife was strained, and Kathleen might not have known all the details. The investigator also specified that Marcus had taken time off work, even though he himself claimed to have been there all day. This discrepancy raised even more suspicions. The investigation was able to locate the phone, and an assistant investigator had already gone to the site. This could mean that the phone was not in her father's possession, and perhaps he was alive. The next day, when Anastasia was on her way to work, her phone rang again. The investigator informed her that her father's phone had been found in the possession of a pickpocket thief arrested in the regional center. This revelation discouraged her. So the phone wasn't her father's. Who sent that text message then? Where was her father? Anastasia had no idea that Liz Kaminsky, Marcus's mistress, might know anything. It was by chance that she witnessed their argument on the phone. Liz was about to go to the investigator, but Marcus persistently discouraged her. He threatened that if Liz revealed his affair with her, it could destroy his family. Anastasia barely contained her anger as she listened to her brother. He was only worried about his own situation, completely forgetting about his father. Back at the police station, Anastasia met the investigator who told her that the bag containing her father's phone had been stolen the very day the message came in. The thief admitted that he had stolen it from a sleeping man on the train, but could not describe him accurately. The only thing he remembered was his gray hair. Anastasia confirmed that her father had gray hair, but she couldn't figure out what he was doing on the train. The investigator explained that the train ran between the city and the regional center, making numerous stops. But it had not yet been possible to establish at which station Mr. Bennett got off. The investigation was to continue in the regional center. The more Anastasia learned, the more confusion arose. She knew her father's health was poor, but she couldn't believe that his mental state could have deteriorated so dramatically. The questions multiplied, and each new detail only increased her anxiety. When the investigator reported that the pickpocket thief couldn't provide any useful information, Anastasia felt her last hope fading. She was sure that the cell phone could be a clue, but all her expectations crumbled. The investigator, noticing her depressed state, suggested a cup of tea and a little distraction. He assured her that sometimes it was in the little things that the clue lay. He said he had found the notary's business card among her father's things. It was lying next to the phone, dust-free, indicating recent use. This made the investigator suspicious. He intended to visit the notary and find out what had connected him to Mr. Bennet. Anastasia was confused. Why did her father need a notary public? That question haunted her all day. During her lunch break, she was interrupted again by a phone call. The investigator said that, according to the notary's information, her father had issued a general power of attorney for the sale and purchase of the apartment in the name of Elena Barnes. This news came as a real shock to Anastasia. Who is Elena Barnes? And why did her father entrust her with the management of his property? This news shook Anastasia to the core. She knew that her father would never sell his apartment, much less discuss such plans with her. The only time he had mentioned buying a house in the countryside, but that was just a passing thought, nothing more than a frivolous dream. Her mind began to paint scary pictures. Who was this Helena Barnes? Anastasia was leaning more and more toward the idea that she could be a black realtor who had somehow gained her father's trust and manipulated him. Thoughts that Barnes might have abused his kindness kept her on edge. She begged the investigator to find the woman immediately before it was too late. The investigator offered to contact Barnes, to invite her in for questioning. Anastasia realized this was a step in the right direction, but there was less and less time. In the evening after work, she decided to return to the police station, hoping for new information. When she went back to the station, the investigator said that Barnes was indeed the last person her father had spoken to on the phone. But then another oddity arose. Barnes' cell phone had also been stolen. This news only heightened her anxiety. Who was this woman really? How was she connected to her father's disappearance? The investigator promised not to stop and to continue the investigation as soon as new information became available. After the visit to the police, Anastasia walked home, her thoughts a mess. She couldn't shake the feeling that Helena Barnes was a con artist who might have messed with her father's head. Perhaps Barnes was trying to get into his confidence, to have a romantic relationship so she could then take over his estate. This speculation only added to her pain and anxiety. Suddenly the phone rang. Anastasia anxiously looked at the screen, hoping it was the investigator. However, when she answered, she heard the voice of her father's neighbor. She reported that she had seen a strange woman who had entered her father's apartment using her own key. This news made Anastasia immediately go to the apartment. Fear and anger gripped her. Who was this woman, and how did she get the keys to her father's apartment? Once she reached the right floor, Anastasia opened the door with trembling hands. In the apartment she was met by Helena Barnes, calmly studying some documents. The sight of her only increased Anastasia's resentment. As if nothing had happened, Barnes explained that she was in the process of processing the property certificate. She claimed that Mr. Bennet had given her the keys and instructed her to prepare the documents for the sale of the apartment. But Anastasia didn't believe a word she said. In her mind, it looked like part of an elaborate plan. Barnes was clearly plotting to sell the apartment and embezzle the money. Irritation and suspicion were building. For a while Barnes tried to justify herself, claiming that she was the daughter of her father's fellow soldier and had been his only support in recent months. But to Anastasia it all sounded like another lie. The situation escalated when Barnes suddenly realized her deception had come to light. Realizing that she couldn't fool Anastasia any longer, she tried to pretend she was sick, and with a loud sigh she sank to the floor as if unconscious. Anastasia, though shocked by this turn of events, could not ignore the possible danger. She immediately called an ambulance, describing the situation to the operator. Time was of the essence, and despite her suspicions, she couldn't afford to stand idly by if Barnes really needed medical attention. The ambulance arrived quickly and Helena Barnes was taken to the hospital. Anastasia felt a mixture of anxiety and relief. As soon as the ambulance left, she immediately called the investigator to report what had happened. You could hear the tension in her voice as she recounted everything that had happened. The investigator listened attentively and, after some thought, asked her to come to the police station. When Anastasia arrived at the police station, The investigator met her with a serious expression on his face. He informed her that Barnes' fainting spell was not a fake. The doctor confirmed that she was 4 months pregnant. This news stunned Anastasia, but the investigator quickly added that it didn't invalidate the theory of possible fraud. The investigation revealed that Elena had approached her father after her husband died a few months ago. Mr. Bennett was her last support, as her father was an old friend of Bennett's who once saved his life. The investigator also said that information about the death of Helena's father while on assignment was being verified. Helena, left alone with 2 children, found herself in an extremely difficult financial situation. Her deceased husband had left a mortgage debt and she could lose her children if she did not pay off the debts. This explained her desperate appeal to Mr. Bennett for help. Anastasia was completely confused. It all reminded her of a fictitious story, and she was beginning to lose faith in the reality of what was happening. But her main question remained the same. Where was her father? Barnes claimed that she had no one else to ask for help, and Mr. Bennett had agreed to help her in memory of her dead friend. Since he couldn't handle the case himself because of his health, he asked Elena to take care of things. The investigator reported that according to Barnes, her father was going to buy a house out of town and temporarily borrow the money from the sale of the apartment. Anastasia was outraged. Even if Barnes was pregnant, it did not rid her of suspicions of fraud. The investigator assured her that after checking all of Barnes' information was accurate. But Anastasia believed that only her father could confirm or deny her words. She was inwardly convinced that Barnes was lying, and the fact that the investigator had sided with her only served to aggravate her irritation. On her way home from work the next day, Anastasia decided to call her friend Alicia to share the latest news. She was sure that Helena Barnes was a fraud, skillfully using her sad life story to gain an advantage. On her way home, Anastasia met her brother Marcus waiting for her outside the house. He immediately began to tell her that after learning which railroad route their father had disappeared on, he had gone around to all the train platforms and stations, conducting his own investigation. Marcus was proud to announce that he had succeeded in finding their father. Mr. Bennett was picked up by local farmers in a deep village near the railroad line. He had been taken in by a witch doctor with whom he had made arrangements to buy a house. The witch doctor took him in as he was unable to return home due to his deteriorating health. Marcus barely drove his father to the hospital, where the doctor gave him the necessary injection and assured him that he would recover. But he also warned that if Mr. Bennett ran away again, he would have to be tied to the bed to keep him from leaving. The main thing was that her father was alive, but Anastasia was surprised by her brother's behavior. Marcus was full of joy and energy like never before. They traveled together to the hospital to visit their father. In the room, where Mr. Bennett was already feeling much better, he explained to Anastasia that Helena Barnes was indeed the daughter of his old co-worker, David Henderson. When Helena had approached him for help after her husband's death, he had been unable to refuse her. While in treatment, he suggested that she look into selling the apartment and use the money to pay off her mortgage debt. The father admitted that he had not informed Anastasia of all this because he did not know how to explain his intention to sell the apartment, which was to be inherited by her. He tried to find a solution, even asking Marcus for advice, but in the end he decided on his own. He also mentioned that he had wanted to make a phone call, but had been robbed on the train. Anastasia began to realize that her father simply didn't want to make life difficult for her or Marcus. She thanked her brother for his help and decided that she would take care of her father. She decided to sell her apartment and buy a bigger one where they could live together, maybe even get a dog, a cat and a parrot like her father wanted. It's been a year. Mr. Bennett had made a full recovery and was now living with Anastasia in a new apartment near the park. The fresh air was good for his health and he was happy with his new home. Helena Barnes, with Mr. Bennett's help, paid off the debt and avoided the intervention of the guardianship authorities. She gave birth to a third son and named him after her savior, Valentine. Anastasia was glad that she had finally found a common language with her brother. All the trials they had endured had only strengthened their family. Now they learned to care for each other and to look at life with more wisdom and understanding.